on a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay with about 7 other men, doing a shakedown/test cruise, planned to be out for about 12 hours. Mid-1980s, we get caught in a tropical storm, winds gusting into the 50-mile-per-hour range, just this short of a weak hurricane. We had just barely rigged storm hawsers and storm sails because one fellow on board who was the best sailor sensed that the storm was almost upon us, otherwise we would have died. During the storm itself, I expected to die at any time. In fact, we made a security call on the radio. If you have any time at sea, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's not that important. For what seemed like 15 minutes, we were in a maelstrom, no visibility, but then it passed. We would live. This was at about 3 p.m., and although there was cloud cover of course, the ambient light was such that you could see 2 miles or so in any direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you know that such storms, particularly in shallower depths near landmasses, dredge a lot of things of the sea floor. The sighting. We are all on deck, working lines, checking damage, etc., and the bay around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the saying, "the sea is confused." I look about 15 feet off the starboard side and something swims to the surface, breaks the surface, looks at us, then submerges again. It was like a thin man with humanoid shape, arms articulated like a man, a human head, but its skin was like covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us, blinked its weird, heavy-lidded eyes, then dove back under. So maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, no injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive, but my senses in that situation were sharpened, not dulled. I had, at that time, about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats, and had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, skates, etc. all around the world. I was not the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster. I made the instant decision that I was not going to say anything. What could I say? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it. The men on this boat were all mechanics and engineers and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake? At the time, it was important for each of us to get D skipper or OOD qualifications, and saying something like that would be frowned upon. And as I stood there in my life vest, soaking wet, hooked onto the steel lifeline, glad to be alive, one of the other sailors, a USN captain with over 30 years experience in the surface navy, piped up and said, "I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these big eyes and then went back under." "Yeah, I saw it too," I said. No one else said that they had seen it. Then we sailed back to the pier later that day and did not speak of it again. Merchant seaman here. I have traveled worldwide with over 50,000 miles under my belt, having crossed the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans multiple times. The thing I have seen a few times that really creeped me out were whilst on watch at night. And on several occasions, I witnessed meteorites, similar, if not bigger to the ones caught on dash cams in Russia. Also, seemingly close to the ship, even audible to the human ear if outside on the bridge wings. Spectacular sights, but also kinda terrifying. I was coming on watch on the 8 o'clock to midnight, and the captain, old man, was covering the first mate's watch as he had a long night with draught survey / stability calculations. I remembered I left my laundry down in the dryer and asked the captain if he would excuse me to go and grab my laundry, one deck down. He agreed, and I went down to the laundry for 2 minutes to put my clothes in the cabin, and by the time I got back to the bridge, the old man exclaimed, "Did you fucking see that? Did you fucking see that?" I said, "No, Captain, see what?" Apparently, a meteor flew across the ship's bow not too far from us. In the 100 years of his and the lookout's combined years at sea, they both said they had never seen anything like it. I was kicking myself. If I stayed, I would have witnessed something amazing. During my time in the Navy, we once transited through the Bermuda Triangle at night. Being the Navy, there was plenty of people playing on the whole eeriness of our location as it was. But at one point, I stepped outside to have a look. It is typically quite dark on a Navy ship in the middle of the ocean at night, so it was quite a shock to see the water actually glowing green where we were. It looked a lot like we were sailing through an ocean full of the chemicals you find in light sticks. It's pretty wild to say, especially in the Triangle. I found out later that it was most likely bioluminescence from plankton in the water. A friend of mine, known as Damo, was an avid fisherman, and he and his dad used to go out sea fishing whenever they could. A few years ago he told me the story, and it creeped the hell out of me, so this seems like an appropriate place to tell it. Damo and his dad were on the second night of a trip, deep sea fishing, and they decided to get some sleep in the early evening so they could go for whatever fish they were after at around 1 AM. The best time to get this fish apparently. Anyway, they only had a small-ish boat, but the weather was extremely pleasant and the sea was calm to the point of stillness, so they figured it would be a great night's fishing for them. Around 12:40 AM, they started to get their gear set up, and, as they were on the starboard side getting bait ready, they heard a loud splash on the port side. As there was almost no swell, they figured it was either a large fish or some gear had somehow fallen in, so they went over to have a look. Floating face up in the water only a few feet from the side of the boat was a young woman. They reckoned she could not have been more than about 30 at the most. She showed absolutely no signs of decomposition/bloating, and there was nothing tangled in her hair, all of which normally would suggest she had been in the water for some time. She was wearing a simple white skirt and a blue-colored strappy top, both of which were clean and apparently looked barely wet, again, all indicating she had only just gone in the water. She showed no signs of damage, like having been beaten or attacked, and her eyes or mouth were shut. Damo said she looked totally peaceful, and like she was simply asleep and just floating on her back in the water. They were both totally freaked out by the whole thing, but reacting more to the need to make sure she was okay, instead of just standing there trying to work out where she came from. They tried to wake her up, shouting to her, etc., and they threw a line to her, hoping they may catch her enough to pull her back in. She showed no signs of movement, and the splashing around they were making with the rope served only to let her body drift further away from the boat. When she was a few meters away, Damo ran off to grab a fishing rod, hoping they could pull her in that way, and his dad ran to the cabin to try and call a coast guard for help. When Damo got back to the side, she had vanished. He frantically searched around, and splashed into the water with the rod, thinking she had bobbed under the water or even drifted under the boat somehow, but the body had vanished. Eventually, his dad, figuring they could not just leave a potential dead/unconscious body floating in the water, jumped in and swam over to where she had last been, hoping he may find her under the surface, but they could not find anything. They did eventually drive the boat around in a good half-kilometer circle, but they never saw the body again. The Coast Guard did come out, and obviously, Damo and his dad were kind of interrogated to make sure they hadn't murdered/dumped the body, but nothing came of it all. The freakiest thing about all of it was that the boat was thoroughly checked before they had set out fishing the day before, so they could say with certainty that there had been no woman on board when they set off, either a dead body or a stowaway/homeless woman. The apparently fresh state of the body kind of removed the possibility that she had been in the water for a while and that they had just found the body and they were far enough out from land and nowhere near any other boats that her appearance there was just totally unexplainable, as was the way the body had just disappeared. Damo and his dad had not been gone for more than 20 seconds from the side of the boat, but in that time, the body just vanished. They were both really shaken by the whole thing, and were more terrified by the fact that her appearance was preceded by the heavy splash in the water, suggesting to them that the body had just entered the water from their own boat. They tell the story now as a kind of, you won't believe what happened to us once type of thing, but it shook them badly, and neither has been back to the same fishing spot since. Sorry it's a long one, but it's so creepy, it felt like it deserved to be fully explained. As far as anyone knows, there were no links made to any known missing women in or around the area they were fishing at. The boat was/is just a small purpose-built fishing boat with one cabin and a small cargo area. They packed all their stuff down below and arranged their bags in the cabin prior to departure, so in theory, they would have seen a body or a live person on the boat, but obviously, there was always a chance that they missed her. The time between the splash and the discovery of the body was maybe 30 seconds at most. They were worried their kit on the port side may have somehow fallen in, so they went over pretty quickly to check. They were fishing off the Cornwall coast here in the UK, so the water would have been damn cold. A lot of people are mentioning the thing about cold water preserving bodies, so I guess that is a real possibility. She wasn't wearing any shoes. They were maybe 10 miles or so off the coast, and it was mid/late July, so the weather was pretty good, for England anyway. My dad spent years at sea, and has many stories from his time on tanker ships as an engineer. One time, the ship was being slowed down by something they couldn't explain, mechanically fine. Turns out they had a large dead whale wrapped around the bow of the ship, slowing them down. But the creepiest story was a simple one. The crew was shark fishing off the bank of a smaller tanker ship, basically attaching meat chunks to hooks and throwing them off the back to trawl in the ocean, Southeast Asia/Australia area. My dad, for fun, made up this large, steel alloy, described it as being incredibly durable, hooked to use. They attached a large chunk of meat to it and throw it off the back. A while later, they haul it back in, only to find the meat is gone and the hook is bent completely straight. There was nothing it could have snagged on in the deep ocean as the boat was driving through. My dad and the crew were sufficiently unnerved. To think that something large down there could bend a large hook like that. Well, about 3 years ago, I went out with a friend on his yacht off the coast of Newfoundland. It was around maybe 2 or 3 in the morning in early fall, so there was a bit of fog, but nothing too serious. We were just going out for a late night cruise to relax and see if we could find any cool fish/inverts, etc. near the surface. After an hour or so of uneventful yachting, we decided to call it a night and turn around. As we started heading back to the shore, behind us we noticed a dim red light in the distant fog. We slowed down to watch it. It was slowly blinking, which stopped us from noticing that it was creeping toward us. We went inside to grab my friend's camera, and when we came back, it was seriously closer and moving quicker now too. We could now hear the hull groaning as if it was under pretty heavy tension. We took a picture with flash and the light stopped blinking. The ship started to speed up, so my friend got on the radio. Not too familiar with how the system works, so fill in the blanks here, experts, and started trying to find a wavelength that they were on so he could tell them to slow down and go around us. When we came out of the cabin, it was basically right upon us, like less than 10 feet away. This huge, rusty ship with a red light on the nose. Next thing we know, it's hours later, and we are waking up to sunrise. The yacht had been drifting freely for hours with the engine still off. Our cameras were gone, as was my cell phone. My friend's was a shitty cameraless phone. We reported it to the police, but they laughed us off as 2 young guys who got too drunk and couldn't handle ourselves out there. We weren't drinking though, so we know something happened. In a vaguely similar vein, there is a story my dad likes to tell. Ages ago, when my father was still racing small sailboats, he did a number of races that took multiple days, so he and his crew would have to spend at least one night on the water. One particular race had started under nasty weather conditions that quieted down to light fog in the evening. My dad and the crew were exhausted and looking forward to taking turns getting some well-needed sleep. My dad's buddy took the first watch on deck, while the rest of them went to bed. It seemed like only minutes had passed when the guy on watch shook my dad awake. "You have to see this, you have to tell me I'm not crazy," was all that his buddy would say. Now pretty spooked, my dad went up on deck to see what had scared his friend so much. The guy pointed into the dark fog, and suddenly, my dad saw a pair of glowing eyes. They turned this way and that, like a creature lazily looking around. Sometimes it would look away, but it would eventually turn back to gaze in their direction. For a moment, Dad thought it must be some bizarre kind of lighted buoy, but the movement pattern was completely random, and the eyes were moving up and down, completely at odds with the movement of the waves, and it was getting closer. Confused, exhausted, and now pretty damn concerned, my dad woke the rest of the crew and brought everybody up to see this thing. Yep, everybody saw it, but nobody could identify it as anything other than eyes. The movement was so eerie, and it was approaching pretty fast. As it swam closer, it was clear that whatever it was enormous. Now everyone was starting to freak out. Dad had no idea what to do, except to try to move out of its way. but the damn monster kept moving around. The crew finally determined its rough path and altered course to avoid it. It was getting very close now. They could hear the rush of water around its bulk and a strange groaning and hissing. It was getting closer and closer. Everyone's heart stopped when the horn shattered the night. Suddenly they saw dim navigation lights through the fog and realized the monster was riding a big-ass barge. They watched in silence as the bulk of the barge materialized. As it passed along, they realized it was carrying a load of garbage, and there was a little bulldozer driving around, pushing the garbage into tiny piles. The monster's eyes were the headlights moving around, climbing up and down the mounds and circling around the deck. They were pretty relieved, but then Dad realized that they had basically almost run into a giant barge, so nobody got much sleep that night, as they kept watch for more monsters in the fog. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you do and you want to hear more, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down below, as it lets the algorithm know that you like my content and it promotes it to more people. My goal for the channel is to hit 50,000 subscribers, and we're closing in fast, so thank you, and back to the stories. A friend of mine has been a fisherman for a long time. Once he was off the Grand Banks late at night, piloting a 50-foot trawler, while the rest of the crew slept. He was alone in the upper wheelhouse, nursing a bowl of weed, when he caught a glimpse of what he said was a large black metal object, several dozen yards off his starboard bow. He shot a glance just soon enough to see something large disappear beneath the waves, but he didn't know precisely how large or how far it was due to poor visibility. He looked at his radar and sonar, but saw nothing. Moments later, a massive column of winged black steel burst forth from the sea roughly 50 yards off his port. He said he soon realized he was looking at the tower of a Trident nuclear submarine. It slipped beneath the surface and vanished without leaving a trace on his radar or sonar. I am a dive master in the Gulf of Mexico. I was dragging our anchor out of the sand and away from the wreck when I noticed a small object out in the sand. I swam up to it, and it was a dive slate covered in barnacles. I'm thinking, fuck yeah, free dive gear as I make my ascent. So, I'm topside. Customers are all settled in, talking up their dives, so I decided to check out my new toy. The dive slate was a bit different from the others I've seen. It had a wrist strap and has these flip-up slates, so it has 3 pages. It had a buildup of barnacles, so I took off my knife to shuck some of them off. After I was satisfied the front was clean, I opened it up to the second page. On it, in just a faint bit of graphite, it said, "Help." My dad was a merchant sailor. He has seen and done some shit. Some things he still won't even tell me. Apparently, there was this crew once, probably more than once, that included this crazy fucking guy that slept with a hatchet who was 1 room over from my dad, and also a guy who everyone hated. One day, they woke up and the guy everyone hated was missing. There was some blood around one of the portholes. The way my dad puts it, you can't fit a grown man through one of those portholes whole. I've tried. So, probably a murder and no one gave a shit. My grandfather was on the USS Block Island when it was sunk off the coast of Italy in 1944. 6 men lost, and 951 were rescued by other ships in the fleet. When the ship was hit, obviously the evacuation was immediate. No time to grab personal effects, just grab a life vest and get the fuck out. Eventually, my grandfather was plucked out of the water by a marine on another vessel. Fast forward to 1966. My grandfather was working in a hangar in the Norfolk VA Naval Base. Right as he was getting ready to wrap up his work for the day, he was approached by 2 men in suits. They were FBI. FBI, are you Mr. Grandpa? Yes. Were you on the USS Block Island in 1944? Yes. Were you issued a 9mm pistol, serial number 12345678? I believe so. Do you know where that pistol is right now? At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, as far as I know. Turns out that as that ship was being evacuated, someone grabbed some weapons, or at least this particular one, out of the armory. The weapon somehow found its way to the US and had been found at the scene of a mob murder the 2 weeks earlier in NYC. Now that I'm thinking about it, their rescue was pretty badass too, and worth telling. The other ships in the fleet sailed, full speed, towards the floating survivors, then cut their engines to avoid detection from the U-boat's radar, I guess, and their momentum allowed them to drift through the survivors and pick them up. My grandfather said he tread water for hours before finally being scooped up out of the ocean. Most of the guys had life vests, but they only helped keep them afloat for a little while, and they had to share them. He said he didn't have enough strength to pull himself up on the rescuing vessel, and that the Marine that pulled him out of the water was one of the largest men he had ever seen in his life. As the Block Island sank, the survivors heard an explosion. They were pretty sure it was the sound of the Block Island exploding, either as a result of the water pressure on the munitions, or maybe something in the ship was still burning and caught munitions, or the ship's fuel supply. No matter the case, they were pretty sure the sound came from their sinking ship, because of the direction it came from. The German sub that hit them thought the explosion was the sound of them being hit and surfaced to assess the damage. When the Germans surfaced, the rest of the fleet blew the U-boat out of the water. I am 26 years old and have worked on a sea scallop boat since I have been about 18 years old. During the course of my time on the water, this question brought two stories to my attention. These are not in order of importance, and I apologize for any grammar mistakes in the future. First story happened a couple of years ago, when we were working off the coast of Long Island, I believe. It was a little rough, but nothing out of the ordinary. It was dark and about 3 in the morning, and everything was going smooth. On a scallop boat, you are required to shuck and do other things in between tows that happen every hour. It's basically a floating factory. I was in a shack barn in the stern of the vessel, standing in the back that can be closed up while you shuck. All of a sudden, the wind starts to pick up, and the lightning starts closer than you really want when you are the tallest object. It's roaring and raining so hard that the rain was hitting me in the back of the shack. The boat starts listing off to port, and it sounds more violent than you can imagine. The door was tied off, so I rushed to shut the door and use all of my strength to shut it. I am by myself in here, and I have never been so scared as when the boat started listing over even harder. This lasted for about 10 minutes. Then it was over. Looked outside and all the gear was everywhere, and a bucket that was deep inside a tote up in the front of the deck was taken out and laying on the deck. The position and the protection where this was only led my other coworkers and I on watch to believe we indeed were just hit by a waterspout. The second story was when the boat was fishing offshore sometime during March. It was shitty and cold out, and you could barely stand up. We were fishing with our starboard, facing the waves, because we were on a tow and producing. As time goes by, it's going to sound weird, but you develop an intuition of where you are going to get hit by a wave when picking up scallops on deck. When working in the pile, you try to keep your scuppers closed. It's rough, because you don't want to make it harder on yourself or get your gloves wet. It all becomes very instinctual, so this night, it starts to get rougher progressively. Another guy and myself are working on the starboard side, and doing fine. He was back aft, and I was forward. I was directly next to the hatch for the fish hold. We are picking, then we feel this wave coming. Like I said earlier, you can tell the power somehow, and guess what you're going to do. This is the East Coast, so the continental shelf drop-off isn't that substantial as the West, so typically, rogue waves are few and far between, so my coworker and I don't even try to duck or cover in anticipation. I just lift my gloves a little and assume that this will be nothing special. Then the rest of it comes. We didn't have a chance. The power was forceful and slammed myself against the hatch, thankfully, because or else, I think I would have been washed over the port side in full gear. The other guy was washed into the other rail, and by the time I got up, I could see the fear in his eyes of what just happened to him. I was more confused due to the impact of the violent wave and the cold water. Got changed and worked for another couple hours before my watch was over. That was a shit night. I am a recreational sailor with a 26-foot sloop, so I don't venture out on the high seas. I stay coastal. One night, I decided to anchor up in this protected bayou. It was summertime, and there was a good chance of overnight thunderstorms, so I carefully made my way through a pretty narrow channel that opens up to some bayou that is protected well enough. Many people will stash their boat there, during hurricanes. Plus, it's usually a nice spot just to hang out. I got there late, around 11 PM or so I had to feel my way in through the dark. There was no moon, and even if there was, the cloud cover was thick enough that it would have been blocked anyway, so it was slow going and a little disorienting. Once I reached the area that opens up a bit, I dropped anchor and prepped the boat in case a storm blew up. I made sure the halyards wouldn't bang around, secured the sails, stuff like that. Then I made my dinner and hopped in the forward berth with a book. Now, you get used to odd noises. Boats have a way of occasionally creaking and clanging a bit. It's a part of their soul. Quite often you will hear a porpoise blow nearby, but this night really scared me for a bit. First, the wind picked up, a lot. The air rushing by my rigging began to make it vibrate so that it was making a high-pitched humming noise. That's not scary, but it kept me awake, and since it was the standing rigging, there wasn't anything I could do about it. So I'm lying there wide awake in the dark, listening to this noise. I'm not freaked out, but it's a very mournful noise. A short while later, as I am huddled in my bunk, I feel the bulkhead flex next to me. At the same time, I hear a very loud thud, followed by a splash. What the fuck? So I race out on my deck with my flashlight and work my way up to the bow. It's windy, so at first, I thought maybe the boat was swinging on anchor and had hit a piling or something. I inspect the area and don't see anything I could have hit. So I grabbed my spotlight and used it to look underwater as best as I could. I didn't see anything submerged either. Okay, so I'm thinking it was a dolphin or perhaps an alligator. The lighting is starting to pick up in the distance. It's still windy, and despite the fact it's summer, I'm getting chilled just standing around the deck in my skivvies, so I climb back below and try to get rest. About 10 minutes later, once again, thud. Again, I go back up on the deck and investigate. And again, aside from an annoying pelican who was perched up on a piling about 30 yards away, I find nothing. I go back to bed. Several minutes later, thud, splash. This went on for about 2 hours. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning, before I set sail, I thoroughly searched the area. I was anchored on a soft mud bottom and never did find a piling or submerged stump or anything that I would have hit. To this day, I have no idea what it was, but it was a very freaky night for me. I still think it might have been some manner of animal, but why on earth it kept coming back over the course of 2 hours is beyond me. I have 4 weird experiences from when I was working on the ships. First one was midway across the Atlantic in 2013. Me and a few other cadets were on the bridge wing, outdoor part of the wheelhouse, for our celestial navigation project. Saw a light come up from the east, fly at high speed until it was almost directly above us, and make a 90-degree turn and zip off even faster. It was at the altitude you would expect to see a plane, but nothing turns when crossing the ocean, and especially not that fast. I don't think people could survive a turn that fast. Second was an animal sighting. This time I was a cadet on another container ship. We had left Dutch Harbor, AK, heading for Japan. We were about halfway between the two, and 100 miles from land. It was choppy and overcast, and the mate and I saw a large school of porpoises and seabirds, which typically would indicate they were following fish. In the middle of the group, we see a huge white fin come up that looks like a whale's paddle fin. Could have been a sperm whale, but we had never seen anything that big. Third one was the weirdest. I was out of school and working on a seagoing tugboat in the Gulf of Mexico. I didn't see it, but I came up to stand my watch at 3:45, and the 2 guys up there had weird looks on their faces. One looks to the other and says, "Should we tell him?" I ask, and they proceed to say that they had just watched a beach ball-sized bubble with pulsing lights on the inside fly in front of the boat about 10 feet above the water. They said it was moving against the wind at a constant speed, and outside of it looked like when there was oil in a puddle in your driveway. Last one was in the Gulf of Mexico again, and this was the longest. Me and a few others were sitting in the mess watching TV, and the captain called down on the phone. He asked if we wanted to see a UFO. We all went up, and the 4 of us sat in the wheelhouse and watched a red light erratically snap from one position to another, a short distance away for about 2 hours. It would sit in a spot for 15 to 20 seconds and then snap to a new position in a straight line and sit. The best way I could describe it would be like putting a laser pointer on a wall and jerking it around to a new spot a few inches away. Eventually, it just took off at high speed, and that was it. Very weird.